So I thought to talk about some ways in which we can make our mind more positive. Last weekend, I gave a course on transforming suffering into the path, the art of transforming suffering. So we were sort of looking at suffering and how to deal with suffering. And one part of that, one aspect of that whole art is, which I don't think we had so much time to talk about it during the weekend, is developing positive states of mind. And that's a big part of the Buddhist path. But also, over the last number of years, for me personally, it's been very helpful to find out that scientific research has shown that working on developing positive states of mind does have measurable effects. I mean, I think for many people this is old news, but for me it was relatively new. And for example, the book Buddha's Brain. I don't know if any of you have read that book, but it's a really delightful book. It's written by Rick Hansen, who's a neuropsychologist, and he's also a meditator. He practices meditation and teaches meditation. And the book is it's actually an explanation of the Buddhist path, the Four Noble Truths, but in untraditional language, and also in terms of our body and our brain. Yeah, so it actually shows how the Four Noble Truths are actually part of our lives and how we can work on this, how we can change this, and so on. So it's a really interesting book. And then another another thing that I came across just last year was an article by Richard Davidson. I found it on the Greater Good Science Center website. They have a newsletter. That's also a source of a lot of this kind of material. And so this was a talk given by Richard Davidson, who, in case you haven't heard of him, he's a neuroscientist and he's been involved in the Mind and Life conferences with His Holiness the Dalai Lama for many, many, many years. And he's been doing a lot of research on the effects of meditation and so forth. So this article is called The Four Keys to Well-Being. And he said that he and his colleagues have done a lot of research on the brain and the effects of different types of practices on the brain. And they have identified these four factors which are keys to well-being, because the basic idea is well-being, which is something I think everybody wants, is something that can be developed. It's a skill that can be developed. It's not something we just have to wait for it to happen, but we can work on it and develop it. So he says they have identified these four keys or four components which are rooted in neural circuits in the brain, and these circuits show plasticity, meaning they can be changed, they can be transformed. So the wonderful thing I found about this is that these four keys or components of well-being have practices within the Buddhist tradition, practices we can use to cultivate these four keys. So the first one is resilience. And this term isn't really found in traditional Buddhist teachings, but it's there. um, and what it means is it's the ability to bounce back after adversity. So when you face some tragedy or problem in your life, some people remain unhappy and depressed for a long, long time, but some people are able to bounce back or recover quite quickly. So that's what's called resilience. And there are definitely methods in the Buddhist teachings for cultivating resilience. For example, what we were talking about last weekend, the art of transforming suffering. So, if we don't know how to do it, suffering problems that happen in our life can really get us down, and we can stay down for a long time. But Buddhism is full of methods for working with problems, working with suffering, so that instead of being overwhelmed by them and drowning in them, We can recover more quickly and even use those problems in our spiritual practice and our path and be able to, help our mind develop more quickly to enlightenment. So, for example, all the methods from the thought training or Lojong tradition, patience, and even the simple thing of remembering impermanence, just reminding ourselves that problems are impermanent, they're not going to last forever. So that's something relatively easy to understand and quick to apply. It can give kind of instant relief. And then, of course, the practice of mindfulness. So there's lots of practices we can use to develop this skill of resilience. And the second of the four keys is outlook, meaning um, having a positive outlook, or maybe what we would normally call optimism. And he says it's the ability to see the good in other people and in situations in life and so forth. And again, we have lots of Buddhist practices for that. The whole practice of loving kindness and compassion, where we, instead of letting ourselves be caught up in anger and criticalness and judgmentalness towards other people, we try to see them in a positive way and generate positive thoughts and feelings towards them. And also precious human rebirth and the whole idea of Buddha nature, that every one of us, ourselves and everyone else, are able to transform ourselves and become enlightened. So that's a very positive outlook. And then the third key is attention, meaning the ability to keep our mind focused rather than wandering all over the place. And he referred to a paper that was put out by a number of Harvard social psychologists who did a whole study on this. And the conclusion they came to was that a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. So if we don't know how to, tame that wandering mind and it's just going all over the place, we're going to have more unhappiness. Whereas if we can learn to have more focused concentration, then that will benefit our well-being. And of course, we know in Buddhism, there are methods for how to do that, how to develop concentration. The whole teachings on calm abiding and, to attain calm abiding is quite a big thing. That takes a long time. But even learning the skill of having an object, whether it's the breath or an image of the Buddha or a mantra or something that we can bring our minds back to when they get carried away, that can be very helpful. And the fourth key is generosity, which of course we have a whole body of teachings on that in Buddhism. So he says research shows that people experience greater well-being when they're doing acts of kindness and generosity as opposed to winning a game or winning a prize or something like that. So there's actually evidence that shows that you feel better, when you're doing something for others and when you're getting something for yourself. And I'll just read from the paper here his words. He says, human beings come into the world with innate basic goodness. When we engage in practices designed to cultivate kindness and compassion, we're not actually creating something new, something that didn't already exist. What we are doing is recognizing, strengthening, and nurturing a quality that was there from the outset. Our brains are constantly being shaped, wittingly or unwittingly, most of the time unwittingly. But through the intentional shaping of our minds, we can shape our brains in ways that would enable these four fundamental constituents of well-being to be strengthened. And that way we can take responsibility for our own minds. And I think this connects with what I was talking about the other day with my mother and her beautiful death. She was so positive in the face of death, because they say that the way we live our life will impact the way we die. Now, the kind of thoughts and feelings we have, the kind of behavior we engage in during our life will be the ones that are most likely to come up at the time of death. So if we really make effort during our life to try to be positive, to have positive thoughts in our mind and behave in positive ways as much as we can, then that will certainly make it a lot more possible for us to be in a positive state of mind even when we're dying.